Hello everyone, in this video I will be walking through the three different methods to declare variables in JavaScript: let, const, and var. This video is for anyone looking to gain a deeper understanding of JavaScript variables, and I will be doing this by looking at two differences between each type of variable, and that is variable scoping as well as the ability to reassign variables. There is another important concept in declaring variables in JavaScript called hoisting. I will be covering that in another video as it's a pretty large concept, but this video will give you a good understanding of how variables work. All right, let's get into the code. All right, guys, to start off, let's take a look at the let variable. So in our first example here, we're going to go over the scoping of the let variable. And one thing to know with let is that it is blocked scope. So what does this mean? It means a block basically means the space between two curly braces. So this could happen in many different ways. It could happen from a function. So let's say test function, and you see curly braces there. So this would be a block, this space in between here. It could be an if statement. So if something, and we have curly braces, this is another block. Or in JavaScript, you could just simply add in two curly braces, and there doesn't have to be any syntax attached with it, just the curly braces, and you've created your own block. So with our block here, let's define a variable using let, and we'll just call it name. And I'll make this name variable set to Marcus. And to show that it's block scope, what we can do is try to reference this variable outside of the block that's declared in. So right here, we're trying to console.log this outside of the block. If we go to our terminal here, and I run this code, we can see here that we get an error that name is not defined. And that is because this name variable only exists within this block. So if we move the console.log to be within the block and we save it again, you can see here that we print our name successfully. All right, so now that we've figured out the scoping of let, and I'm just going to update here to be block scoped. Let's go ahead and create another example. So this example will be demonstrating the reassigning of the let variable. So let can be reassigned. I'm not sure if there's supposed to be a dash there. Let's just put it like that. So what does this mean? I'm just going to comment this out here so our console.log is a bit clearer. So if we create another block here, and I just write let name equals Marcus again, and then I want to reassign this name variable to something else, I am able to do it with let. So if I click, or if I write out this line, name equals Roland, and then I print this to the console, you will see here that this variable will print as expected. And now the variable has been updated to Roland. So this is important because as you'll see with const later on, this functionality does not work and it's specific to let and var. All right, now let's take a look at const. So I'm just going to comment out this example here. And we'll go ahead and create some new examples for const. So this will be const. And let's go ahead and demonstrate the scoping again. So just like let, const is block scope. So if I do name equals Marcus and I try to print it outside of the block, it will not work. So if we go here, you can see we get that error. And we can resolve it quickly. You guys have already seen this, but I just want to go through the demo so we fully understand. We see we have Marcus here. So just like let, const is block scoped. Example 1, block scoped. So now the difference with const will be with the ability to reassign a variable declared with const. So let's just go ahead and comment this out here. I'm going to write in our second example, reassigning const. So if we create a new block here, and I'm just going to write name equals Marcus, and then if we try to reassign this name to something else, so Roland, and I try to print this out to the console, let's run this code and see what happens. So we can see here we get an error, assignment to a constant variable. And basically with const, once you've declared a constant variable, you cannot use as an easy way to think about this is you can't use the equal sign again to change that variable. And this depends on the data type. So you won't be able to use this equal sign to change it, but if you are working with arrays or objects, there are ways to modify constant variables, as we'll see. So I'm going to comment out this example, and now let's create an array. So I'm just going to write const arrays, and let's create a new block, and we're going to create an array of names. I'm just going to say Marcus and Roland. And what we can do is, if you want to add another variable to an array, we can use a function available on all JavaScript arrays called push. So if I write names.push, I can add a new name to this list. So let's say Earl. And then if I console.log names, we can see in the console here, we get an array with Marcus, Roland, and Earl. So const can be a little bit deceiving because you would think that we've declared a constant up here on line 39 that cannot be changed. However, using functions, default JavaScript functions that exist on an array data type, we are able to actually modify the existing array. So that's something very important to keep in mind as you're developing your code. Just because something is a constant doesn't mean it'll never be changed. This also is true for objects. So if I just comment this out, we're going to create an object, and I'll show you that we can also modify constant objects. So if I do const person, and let's make this person, we'll add a name property, and then we'll add a nationality property. And down here, let's add in a new property. We'll say person.birthday. And we'll just make it a string. July 1st, 1990. And now let's print out this person. But first, we're going to print it out actually before the addition of this property, and then we'll print it out after the addition. So if we go to our terminal here, we run our code, you can see that our constant object, our constant person, was originally this object with a name and nationality property. And then after we assigned a birthday, it became this new object with an additional property. So remember, when you're working with constant arrays and objects, they can't be changed. And kind of a fast, easy rule to keep in mind is that if you're directly assigning a variable to something completely new with an equal sign, it probably will not work with constants. However, if you're adding an additional property with an equal sign and not changing the whole object in this place, in this case, then it will work. And then same with arrays. As we can see here, we're actually not using the equal sign at all to reassign this value. We're calling an existing function that exists on the type of array that will add an additional property to the array. Now let's take a look at var. So var doesn't get used too much nowadays in JavaScript, in my experience. That is due to a few things with var that make it a lot different than working with let and const, and we'll see that here. So it mainly has to do with the scoping. So var is function scoped. And now you might be thinking, how is that different than block scoping? Because doesn't a function declare a block? And that is true, and we'll see how it works here. So for example, if I create a block here and I create a name and I call it Marcus, and I want to print that name outside of the block, you will see here what happens. So if we run it, we're able to print the name successfully. And that's because var is not scoped to this block, it's scoped to a function. And you might say, well, isn't this globally scoped because there is no function here that we can see? And I will get to that later on. It's actually a little tricky piece of JavaScript. But if we declare a function here, so let's say function get name, and we declared a variable name within it, and then we go to print this, you will see here that name is not defined, and that is our name right here. So what just happened? Well, the var name gets scoped to this function, not globally scoped, scoped to the function, which means that outside of the function, it does not exist, and we get an error. So if we move this printout within the function, we can see here that, oh, it didn't work because we didn't call the function. So let's call the function. And we can see here that we get Marcus printed. So now let's answer the question of why people think var is globally scoped. Actually, before we get to that, I just want to demonstrate the block within the function. So if we have a block here and we print out the name, it works just fine. So let's get back to why var is not globally scoped. Basically, when you create a JavaScript file, what you actually don't see is that the JavaScript file is actually a function. So I'm going to write some really contrived code right now, but we could pretend that this index.js file is a function called index. And within this block contains all of the code within index.js. So what happens here when we declare a var variable is the var variable actually gets scoped to the file. So if we declare the name outside of any function within the file, so let's get rid of our contrived example here, but if we just declare a var name on line 76 here, and it's not within any functions within the file, this var is going to be available within the whole file now. So that's what gives it the perception of being globally scoped, is that if it's not within a function, it's available within the whole file, because a JavaScript file is actually just a giant function. But we would not be able to access this name in another file if we had another file in the same folder, for example, unless we specifically export it. So that answers one of the common misconceptions about var, that it's globally scoped when actually it is function scoped, and the function that it's scoped to is behind the scenes and we don't see it. All right, now let's move to the reassigning of var. So I'm just going to get rid of this example here, and I'm actually going to copy this example. We'll just call example 2. And var can be reassigned. So if we take a look within our function here, and we've declared var name, just like let, name can be reassigned to whatever we want it to be. So if I reassign it to Roland here, and I print it out, and we go ahead and run this code, you will see that it has been changed to Roland, and there's no problems there. Thanks for sticking with me until the end of this video. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them down in the comments below. Thanks again, and have a great day.